the 8th of May 2025. Or 2 o'clock, so it's 4 o'clock in committee room for IGB members. Sorry for that. Please note that there was a development session on the schedule 1 meeting for May 2025, 2 to 4 o'clock in the committee room for IGB members. This will have 2 sections, the work about centre and the section for being the IGB self-development plan for 25-26. Members should also know that surrounding power centre will start being held on Wednesday, the 21st of March from 21st of May from 1:30 to 4 o'clock at St John's and King's Church. Also, I'll just note as well that the webcast is not live at the moment. It uses some technical errors, but we will make sure that the recording is put on the website following the meeting. Thank you. I'll move on to Chief Officer's report.
Okay, thank you to my team for contributing to the series of reports, and as always, I'm going to report about to the highlights the interests and intentions. And so asking members to the prevention of the HSCP conservation program and accepting the development segment. And you know, you have focusing on early intervention and prevention, and identify the projects that be one, which will be in hope first review, and phasing modelling, contracts and efficient work, frailty and work application therapy review. And we are lucky enough to have somebody who's happy to live and provide some external scrutiny. And she will attend the flexible living time and will see that this is important, particularly around the home first. And we will bring about a full update to the board at some point when this year at the development session or formal feedback to the board to start being improving. Again, to note the financial recovery action, which the focus was around our resource panel and our allocation of care packages. As part of good practice, we were able to review 600 packages of care, and to note that the majority of care that was in place was safe and appropriate for these individuals, which from an assurance point of view is good to know. There were some packages were increased and there were some packages were decreased, but with some Invest and Save financial support from Midlothian Council, we were still able to save circa £500,000 on that again. So thank you to Fiona Kennedy and the team for the work that's in place around that. Again, to notice the governance progress around our draft new strategic plan. The plan has gone to NHS Lothian senior management team and supported, and it will go to the strategic planning committee at the beginning of May. It will also come to to Midlothian Council CMT at the beginning of May. There's an elected members briefing in May as well, with a view to it formally coming to the council and NHS Lothian board meeting, and finally again, as you know, to the IGB for sign off in October. And the last thing is to note the work that Rebecca Green, Claire Ross and Fiona Stratton have been leading on around frailty. Again, this is about us redesigning our services around a holistic whole life approach to living and ageing, and a move away from an age or move to an ageless model, moving away from an age-related model, much more to a functional model, and again supporting our focus around reinvesting in early intervention and prevention. The work noted in the paper is about adopting a frailty scoring score across the system, about development of digital resource directory that people can access, and again eventually moving to development of a digital frailty personal passport. And this piece of work will be embedded into our transformation programme moving forward. So again, we will keep the board fully updated in terms of the progress we make around that. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Morag on her report? Well,
I just wanted to say how helpful these reports are in terms of giving us sort of an update. And there are a couple of things that I'll pick up with individuals, but they give us an idea of the progress in particular. And you know, and things sort of moving on, the National Social Work Agency, I guess I would be keen if Nick has any comments to make on the way that that looks as if it's shaping up. Are we content with that? I note that it's going to be an executive board, so it will be, you know, the main professional input will be from the Chief Social Work Advisor. You know, are there any comments that Nick you would want to make as the Chief Social Work Officer on that to date? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Val. Yeah, so broadly speaking, from a Chief Social Work Officer point of view, and we've discussed it within our national network, we would welcome the principle of establishing a national social work agency. However, we do have some concerns about the routing of it within Scottish Government, I suppose, as an executive agency. The preference certainly from Chief Social Work Officers and Social Work Scotland was that it would be independent from Government completely. That was always our understanding. And that hasn't materialised. That said, there are some positive developments around it. The focus around workforce planning, professional leadership and governance, and we still await the Care Inspectorate report around social work governance that is due in the next month or so. But the focus around workforce planning, particularly education, training, professional development, is welcome, and I can envisage the fact that it is part of a government, wider government setup, that may have some benefits as well. But overall, the view from Chief Social Work Officers, which I would strongly agree with, would be that we would have preferred the National Social Work Agency to be an independent external body to government.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick. I thought that I haven't been around the conversation for a wee while, and I thought that that might be the view, because I think that was the emerging view when the National Care Service was being discussed. And I suppose I would support that. I think there's an awful lot of really good stuff in here, so don't want to sort of rain on that, but it just feels a little clunky with the executive group and then the subgroups. And I think the original idea was that it would be collaborative and partnership. The whole lot of it would be, rather than it being invested in an executive group. So I would just endorse your comments, but really welcome the update and really welcome the fact that the National Social Work Service is actually being given this priority and has been taken forward. Thanks for that, Nick. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Val. Andrew?
Hi, thanks, and thanks for the paper. It is really helpful to get a sense of some of the issues going around. My comment was really just to ask Murray, and I maybe should have emailed this. I'm just wondering how the initiative at the Royal Infirmary is going around the A&E and the improved the attempt to try and manage the queues in that situation, and what impact that's having in Midlothian, how we're responding.
So I'm going to take a presentation later on the agenda on the general unscheduled care development. It doesn't focus too much around ED, but I know that the performance around ED and the Royal Infirmary has been significantly improved. There was a slight deterioration over the last couple of weeks, which may be Easter holiday related or whatever, but generally speaking, the performance around that target has significantly improved. But I'm very happy to take you through our performance around the elements of unscheduled care plan presentation.
Thank you. Is there any further questions for Morag on this? No. Okay. I'll move on to 5.3, Strategic Planning Group Chair, and I'm going to Andrew or Jill. We can decide.
Sorry, thank you. So many of the issues have been covered around the strategic planning group, have been covered in Morag's report, so I don't really need to repeat them. But other just to point out that obviously we're trying to get a bit more upstream. So the first draft complete annual performance report was presented in an attempt to try and make that process less clunky and less troublesome for people, and that's underway. The IGB performance framework. The work is underway to review that in the light of the new strategic plan, and that will be discussed at the July and come to the board in August. We also had a paper on the joint strategic needs assessment and that update on the rolling programme to ensure that all our data is as current as can be in our process, and that continues on. In terms of next steps will be a progression of the strategic plan, obviously through partner organisations, and while that's going on, preparing the key supporting statutory documentation. And also we have the Midlothian Equalities Outcomes report here today. And I suppose the final two issues just to leave with you, the vice chair of the SPG is vacant, but we have suggested that the third sector might want to take that on, and we've opened that space there, and we're waiting to see how the third sector organisations might want to come into that. And a final look, we're looking at the risk register, I think, with the Audit and Risk Committee, and that will be coming back in due course. That's all I was going to say, Jill, unless I've missed anything.
Thanks, Chair. The only thing to add would be to offer the board assurance that in the May SPG, the officers of the HSCP are scrutinising the operational plans at the highest level, so that we can link really clearly into our directions model and directions reporting moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that update. I'll move on to 5.4 Audit and Risk Committee Chair, and I'm moving to Val.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be able to be really brief. It was the first meeting of our independent advisor, a member, Anthony Clark, and the first meeting of Chris King. So we were going through a bit of a transition at this meeting. So it felt really good. It felt like we were going to be moving very much in the right direction. We signed off the internal audit plan and the external audit plan at the meeting. And really the rest of the meeting was kind of really trying to, I guess, transition from a world that we were in to a world that was going to be shaped by both a new interim chief finance officer and our independent member. And you know, some of that was around sort of housekeeping and making sure that we had action plans in place and that we're pulling things forward or whatever. So it felt like a very positive meeting with some substantial items, but some tidying up items as well. I don't know if Chris wants to add anything to that.
I think that was actually a really comprehensive update there, Val. Like you said, the two biggest bits that came from that meeting were the approving the internal audit plan and improving the timeline for the external audit. So our first big meeting in terms of the accounts will now be June.
Thank you for that. I will move on to items for decision. 5.5 Midlothian IGB Equalities Outcomes 25 to 29, and I'll go to Jill for this one.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the draft Midlothian IGB equality outcomes for 25 to 29, and that's today for your review, and then subject to any required revisions to ask for delegated authorities to publish before the 30th of April this year. You'll know that we're required to publish equality outcomes every 4 years and a mainstreaming equality progress report at least every 2. Midlothian IGB last published their equalities outcomes in 21, so that means that we're due again now in 25 to 29, and our last mainstreaming equalities report and action plan in 2023. You'll remember that I had previously asked the board for an extension to publication date. We didn't think we were going to make that date due to capacity challenges, but thanks very much to all of you for your strong commitment to advancing equality and for intentionally embedding equality issues and solutions at the centre of the draft strategic plan and the directions for 25-26. So not only has that allowed the board to continue to focus on equality issues and keep them really visible in that thread through its strategic planning, it's also made it a lot easier for me and my team to be able to take forward that draft for your review. So thank you very much for that. It means that we will be in line with statutory publication dates subject to your approval today. It's also proposed that the board will report on progress to the 2023-25 mainstreaming equality progress report, within our annual performance report this year. And thereafter, we'll adopt annual reporting on that. So that will keep us comfortably within the 2-year timeframe and makes sense for us to do it in our APR. So we continue to see equality issues through our performance, evaluation of strategic planning, discussion and transformation. So you're asked to note the requirement to develop these equality outcomes and take action, to review and then, subject to any amendments, of course, give me delegated authority to publish that and report to SG. And then lastly, note that we are going to continue that annual reporting in our APR.
Thank you, Jill. Does anyone have any questions for Jill on this paper? Val?
It's maybe something I've covered in the past, Jill, but I was struck by the, we have the protected characteristics, I think it's 9 categories or whatever, and what you're saying in the report is that we don't report on all of them. And I just wondered if there was a risk in there not doing that. There was a part of me thinking that we might miss something or something might be emerging and we might not be on top of it. And I also wondered about that thing about the early intervention and prevention sort of element of equalities. So, I'm just curious about that. I guess I see that this is a way of doing it, and I don't really have a problem with that per se, but I just wonder about whether there is a risk in there for us in doing that or continuing to do it without monitoring it and picking it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Really sensible and helpful comments as always. I think the first thing to say would be that we spent a lot of time liaising in a pan-Lothian way to make sure that we were picking up the quality issues that were most important to the people in Lothian and choosing those key areas to really focus on. So the impetus for the equality issues and challenges that people face created the way forward. But you're absolutely right. There is some inherent risk in not considering all of those protected characteristics in every plan, but it would be extremely challenging to monitor all of those as things currently are. So again, thanks to the board for embedding those equality issues in our directions. We do have a direction to start working with our NHS Lothian and Midlothian Council partners to be able to disaggregate by HSCP area some of those issues, because we can't really take action on what we don't know right now. And until we can pull that data together or find out if it even exists in the system, of course, we only can pull from the system what people put in. And some of those protected characteristics are better recorded than others in some of our systems and mechanisms to do so. So we are working on being able to work towards that. I think it's really important that we do, but right at this moment, we would struggle to have enough evidence to be able to show where we could meaningfully take action.
Thank you for that. Is there any further questions for Jill on this paper? No. Are we happy to approve? Okay, thank you. I will move on to items for discussion. 5.6 Midlothian IGB finance update, and I'll go to Chris for this.
Thank you. So the finance report today outlines a couple of key updates in terms of financial management for the board. I appreciate it is quite high level today, largely because we are between both financial years. We don't have the final 24-25 figures, and we don't have any information available yet for 25-26. So in terms of the report, there are 4 main parts I will sort of very briefly take you through. The first is the 24-25 financial position. So the last formal update on the financial forecast was at Q3. At that point, the projected position was to be an £8.4 million overspend. So there's been no update from social care, which is as per the reporting schedule. However, NHS Lothian have undertaken a month 11 forecast, which showed a small improvement, so around £400,000 better. As mentioned at previous meetings, it is clear we're going to have a significant overspend. And discussions are ongoing with partners in terms of the management of this come year end. To reassure the board, these discussions have been really positive, with the pressures facing IGB being acknowledged by both partners. I think it is really important to acknowledge that these figures are still fluid. So as much as I'm saying there's an update of £400,000 in our favour, there is still a huge amount of volatility in the system. And actually, we won't know the true extent of the financial position until early May. The second item is around annual accounts. So Val's touched on this already, but Audit Scotland's audit plan was presented at Audit and Risk. And there's two key milestones that I wanted to highlight today. The unaudited accounts will be presented to the board in June, and the audited accounts will come back in September. So this is in line with previous years and allows us to meet our legal duties. The third section is the reserve policy. So reserves and our ability or potential inability to meet our current reserve policy was a significant part of the discussions as the IGB tried to set a balanced budget. The current policy was established back in 2017. Now what the policy does is it outlines the purpose, use and governance of reserves, and it also sets a target level that the IGB should hold. So that currently sits at 2% of our annual revenue budget. The purpose of having a general reserve is to provide contingency to mitigate financial risk and promote financial resilience. Given the sort of significant changes in the financial landscape, the proposal is to review the reserve policy, basically just to make sure it is still fit for purpose. As part of the proposal, it's proposed that Midlothian Audit and Risk Committee take forward the work prior to recommendation to the board. And the last bit of the finance paper was just around the medium-term financial strategy. So the medium-term financial strategy provides a framework to support strategic planning and financial sustainability. It aims to do this over a 3 to 5 year horizon. The strategy outlines the key financial challenges and risks facing health and social care services and sets out a proactive approach to manage these pressures. What I think is really relevant here is also aligned closely with IGB's strategic priorities and underpins the delivery of the strategic plan. So following the 25-26 budget setting process, the medium-term strategy is now being reviewed and updated to reflect the decisions that were made, ultimately ensuring that there is a stronger alignment between financial planning and strategic planning. The proposal around the medium-term financial strategy is that the work will be led by myself as Chief Finance Officer and with support from the Integration Manager, and it will come back to the board in August for review. So I'll very quickly just recap what the report asks members today. So it was to note the financial position, agree to A&R reviewing the reserves policy, and note the ongoing work to develop the medium-term financial strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Has anyone got any questions for Chris on his report? I think we're all quite well versed, Val.
Sorry. Yeah, just fine with all of this and great report. Thank you, Chris. Note that the Audit and Risk Committee is going to be asked to look at the reserves policy. Absolutely fine with that. And I was thinking what that might look like, and I just wanted to ask a question of people around the table today, any other of the members around the table, if they had a view that they would like to express here in relation to that, because it'll be a smaller committee. And I think we're all very aware of, well, you know, the Audit Scotland's view on reserves. I've now developed my own view on reserves, and I'll try and be impartial as I take this forward. But I just wondered if people at the actual IGB at this point would want to make any comment about that, or indeed how we might go about the Audit and Risk Committee's piece of work around reserves. Thanks. If there's no comment, that's fair enough, but I just want to give people the opportunity. It's a wider group.
Andrew?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really point. And I was going to come back to Chris and say, what do you think the policy options within that are likely to be around that to help me work out? Are we talking about changing the 2%? Because that's quite a big quantum when looking at today's position, or are we, you know, how would we want to change that or review that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair challenge. And I suppose if you look at the current policy, most of it is still absolutely appropriate in terms of the use and the governance around the reserve. The big elephant in the room, as you touched on there, is the threshold, the 2%. So to try and contextualise this a little bit for everybody in the room, if we maintain that 2% as our policy, you're looking at a general reserve in excess of £3 million. It just doesn't feel feasible just now. And that will be the challenge, because I think for financial governance and resilience, 2% will be the optimal number. It's just how realistic is that? And Andrew will work closely with other IGBs in Lothian and nationally to see if anybody else has reviewed their reserves policy.
That's helpful. So it might be a slow build up to 2% rather than a quick. And I suppose that's where I'm in my head, is that I think we need a reserve. So not having reserves is really risky for us as an organisation. So we have to, but it's how we get there, given the challenges, and that's a real balancing act, I think. Sorry, Val, I don't know if that's any help.
Chair. Yeah, it is really, because you want to be impartial if you're going through something like this, but just reading all the other documentation, I'm thinking about the risk of not having reserves. Exactly as Chris says, how can you justify having that? But looking at the national picture, there are a number of IJBs who still have reserves and still have challenges. And it was just to try and get a feel from the IJB itself, rather than just in the Audit and Risk Committee, what's the sort of knee-jerk reaction to this? And mine would be to try to build it up again, and to maybe come back with some kind of a proposal to do that, which seems to be what folk are intimating in a way. So it's actually really helpful to do that, and we can proceed now with Audit and Risk and try and set it in that context. I don't just want to come back with something completely adrift from what folk are talking about here. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it's going to be a conversation that's going to have to take place in some form at COSLA, because that is coming up quite a lot. I wonder if it's worth. I obviously attend the COSLA board for health and social care, so I wonder if it's worth maybe a chat with the chair to see if there should maybe be some level of a national focus group to have a conversation about reserves. So a lot of IGBs in a very similar situation to us, if not as a year ago. So it's maybe worth a chat. I can definitely take that up with them, and I think we should maybe get a more of a national picture before we make any moves on it.
And I think, you know, where you can get your strength from, in a sense, as well, Conor, apart from this IJB, is the Accounts Commission are really strong on the level of risk that IJBs, the risk that we're imposing by making decisions to have and no reserves. So I think a national position, if the Audit Commission is saying that, so what are we doing from a governance point of view and a risk point of view nationally? So I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Andrew?
I just wanted to ask a little bit about the movement towards a final outturn position, and I suppose this is asking about Midlothian's financial systems and the fact, because I suppose I am quite nervous if we're having to wait for a quarter to get a quarter outturn, given how volatile and how demand-led the figures are. Because 3 months, if it's going the wrong way, in 3 months it will have really gone the wrong way. Your ability to control that. So I suppose I'm just asking about how in an environment where you're not doing a month 11 outturn, you're actually waiting until month 12 outturn. How easy is it to manage your financial position in that context?
You're absolutely right. It's incredibly difficult to manage your financial position when you're 3 months behind at all times. So we have acknowledged this risk. So for 24-25, we couldn't really change anything in terms of the report, and we're too far through the year. However, for 25-26, what we're working on just now is how to become more proactive with the reporting. And it may not be that you get a full financial forecast, but can we do something around resource panel, where is our biggest spend? And it's really trying to move towards that, because you're absolutely right. If you really would only have quarter 1 and quarter 2 to make any meaningful change, if you're just reporting by quarters, because by the time you get Q3, the financial year is pretty much gone. So there will be a change in the reporting in 25-26.
I think that's really helpful to hear, because I'm a bit concerned, given our discussion about reserves. And, you know, this is about financial resilience. If we're not on top of our finances, we're going to get ourselves back in a difficult situation. And I'm also thoughtful about how that risk should be recorded on our risk register, because if risk can genuinely drive improved performance, and whether there's a sort of a workaround you're talking about there, but ultimately it's a question there for the finances of the council, is how can we get a bit more just in time about this, or just in month would be good. And I suppose so a question back to the, is that a question I can ask to be taken back to see whether we can actually more helpfully get upstream of this question? I mean, I hear your workaround by targeting your big areas, but the fundamental question is, are the ledgers operating in a just-in-time position? Sorry.
No, again, it is a very, very fair question. This is one of the challenges you've got of bringing two organisations together as part of the IGB. They have different financial systems, different reporting schedules, etc. I'm more than happy to take this offline and have a more in-depth chat around some of the technicalities of it. But to try and reassure you a little bit, Andrew, we have discussed this with both partners in terms of report, and we've had really good engagement from particularly the council in terms of, yes, quarterly is not going to work given the scale of your financial challenge.
If I can come in as well, really, Chris has always undersells himself, Andrew, and Chris and Jill are looking at a piece of work with a draft dashboard that will allow us to have more realistic live reporting around the resource panel, because the significant resource moves around the resource panel, as we've talked to throughout the year. We're hopeful that we'll see an improved position in our resource panel in Q4. As Chris says, we'll get that hopefully in a couple of weeks. But again, trying to get that kind of live performance data around it is incredibly difficult and incredibly frustrating, because we'll put things in place and we don't see whether they're working or they're not working for 3 months down the line. So again, there's some data sharing agreement work we need to get agreed. We believe we can do that, and we're hopeful within the next couple of months that, well, a couple of months, maybe a little bit longer. Jill's making a funny face at me. Maybe slightly longer than that. That we'll actually have a tool that the HSCP team can use, which is a much more live record of resource allocation and spend around the resource panel. So we will have that in place. We're pushing to get that done as quick as possible. There is some data sharing agreement work we need to do initially, but that should put us in a much better position, because that is the most volatile element of our budget spend.
Thank you, Chair. So absolutely, I think this is really important work, and we need to give it, good considerations as to how we can think about doing what we can do differently and accepting what we can't change because of the mechanisms of our partner organisations. Just to set a little bit of realism around that, there are some DSAs that would need to be put in place. There are some capacity that we need to think about, but it's also about how we would clean the data to be able to use it usefully. So we are working on it now. We're starting to think about it now, but when that will become a reality, it may take a little bit of time, because we want to do it well, and we don't want to provide forecasting tools that provide less helpful information. We want it to be meaningful and helpful in the right ways. But absolutely on that, and hopeful to bring that to you as soon as we can.
Thank you. Is there any further questions to Chris? No. Okay. Chris will be happy. 5.7, Midlothian IGB performance update. I'm going to Eloise for this, please.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I am hoping that my headphones will last for the length of this update, because they've failed twice already while I've just been listening in. So if they suddenly cut out, if somebody could give me a little wave and let me know, that would be much appreciated. So here to do the regular update for the IJB performance report. You have the paper and the appendix. So 3 actions for the board this afternoon: to note the performance against the goals, to note the proposed reporting timeline that we're setting out for directions for 25-26, and to note briefly the revised process of updating the joint strategic needs assessment, which, as you know, is our statutory duty to produce and keep updated within a 3-year rolling period in order to support the writing of the IJB strategic plan. So at Appendix 1, you'll find the regular update from the Local Intelligence Support Team, the arm of PHS who support us with the production of these MSG indicators. There is no update to the slides that are included in the pack from the previous IJB's meeting because of the time lag in that quarterly update process. But you'll see within the body of the paper that accompanies that we've had a look at the management data that we can investigate and explore but can't publish. So you'll note from that management data that was accessed when the paper was submitted that in terms of the A&E target, we are currently meeting it. In terms of emergency admissions, we're currently meeting, and also for unplanned bed days, meeting our target. For delayed discharge, occupied bed days, currently not meeting it, and the end of life care and balance of care measures, we don't hold that data locally, so we can't give a management update to those indicators. In terms of directions, what we're setting out is a kind of evolution of the reporting process that Jill has been building over the last couple of years, ultimately getting towards a position where we will have an aggregation of group service objectives that inform an auditable log of progress against directions that will be reported to you as usual at the half-year point and the year end. The half-year schedule that we're setting out is that SPG will receive the report for scrutiny and discussion at September's meeting, and IJB would receive it for your review and your approval to publish on the 9th of October of this year. And then for the year-end report, SPG for scrutiny and discussion at the end of January of next, and for yourselves to review and approve to publish on the 19th of February 26. And the final point around the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment is following a significant piece of work with the support of our public health colleagues and the list analysts who contribute to this work. We are moving from a quarterly update to a biannual update, which will come in May and November of each year, which still keeps us comfortably within that 3-year legislative timescale, but also allows for the intervening quarters to support some really important design and review work that we need to do about the resource that we just haven't actually had the capacity to be able to squeeze that in. So it is a huge document across a number of web pages, and we know we can do a better job of actually reflecting the insight and some of the predictions as opposed to just providing a ton of raw information. So that's the ambition in terms of that quarterly update of the data, moving to biannual to give us the capacity to do that redesign and transformation piece about the pages themselves. That's the update in a nutshell, Chair. And just if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Eloise. Does anyone have any question for Eloise on her paper? No. Okay, thank you, Eloise, for that. We will move on to 5.8, Midlothian IGB Draft Annual Performance Report, and I'll go to Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, apologies that the report that would sit at the front of this item is not included in your pack. We will rectify that and reissue that pack and ensure that's online. However, you all know that I can talk about the issues around the APR until you're all ready. So I will go through that that paper verbally for you until you have it in your hands. So this is an early draft for comment and input. The content has been updated as far as is possible to date and will be further developed between now and August when the board will next review this. Of course, SPG will review in the interim for scrutiny in July. And there will be 3 main areas of update of information. The first one will be our PHS data, and we know that that data is released for management purposes sometime in May, and then scheduled for early July for validated data for publication. So we have a small window with which to work with our validated data and make meaningful narrative to describe our performance from that time. The second bucket of information as such would be the citizens panel data. And as you know, we've designed a survey over the last 2 years that starts to capture local views in ways and local experience in ways that deepens our understanding of what that experience is for people and communities and enhances the indicators that are provided for us by our public health colleagues. The third spot for improving the information is our service impact and outcome stories. And we have a number of them already, as you can see, largely taken from our quarterly reporting across the year. But we will be able to choose specific examples that can highlight and help narrate the data once we have it from Public Health Scotland, and be able to really show in a meaningful way where our services are making a difference in the lives of people and communities. As you all know, the HACE survey is not a year this year for update. That happens every 2 years. So the indicators that are generated by the HACE will not be updated in the 24-25 APR. And SPG will review and scrutinise the data in that July session. So at this time, members are just asked to provide any feedback on the APR as it stands at the moment, and then note that due to the late release of the PHS data, it's impossible for us to meet the statutory deadline of 31st of July, as the other IGBs across Scotland also find, and we will bring it to the first available board for approval in August.
Thank you, Jill, for that. Any questions for Jill? Andrew?
So I've already seen this, so I'm going to ask a question which I may have asked before and I've forgotten the answer to. So apologies if that's the case. I'm just looking at it. I was reflecting on the figures for 5 and indicator 5 and 6, where our trend is actually going against the national levels. These are adults receiving care or support. Adults receiving care or support rating it as excellent or good, and the other one is GPs as well, is adults had a positive experience of care provided by the GP practice. And I'm sort of interested to know, do we have any hypothesis why that is the case and what we can do about it? Or is it just the frailties of data? It's because great structure for reporting, but it's, as you know, my thing is to get underneath the data to understand why and where we can actually have impact around it. And I should have asked this question, shared this with you, Jill, so apologies for that. But
thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for your question. I'll take some of the data aspects of that, and then I might pass to Dr. Green to talk about some of the GP experience. The first part is that, as we know, the HACE survey has a limited audience. It is a survey that goes out to a random selection of residents who live in Midlothian who are also registered to a GP. So that has its limitations in itself. And then the potential self-selection bias of those who choose to return it means that it's a relatively limited sample. Other than the GP data, there's nothing in there that would help us be able to dig down into it and improve, because we don't know what service people are referring to, unless we're talking about the GP practice data. So that's a case in point as to why the citizens panel is so important, because that helps us in different ways to be able to understand that experience. So we don't really know that yet. We've got 1 year's worth of data. We need to start looking at this year's citizens panel data before we can really get into that and be able to work out why it is that is the experience and what we can do to make the change. Because of course, that's the most important thing. Measuring the thing doesn't change it. Doing something different changes this. And we're not quite sure what that is on the basis of the data we have. I'll pass over to Dr. Green for the update on the GP experience.
Thanks, Jill. So I recognise there is limitations in the data, but GP data has improved in access, and that's been through a coordinated and concerted effort to make a series of improvements across Midlothian to support our GP colleagues to improve access and experience for patients in Midlothian. And that was some work agreed with Jim Crombie as part of the executive performance team back in 2023, and we did some quality planning work and set out some change ideas and put those in place. I'm pleased to see that they have translated through into a small improvement in the right direction against a reasonably stable position across the rest of Scotland. The national issues around funding, declining workforce, many of the other pressures, including increasing demand nationally, that is making access to general practice more difficult. So we're delighted to see in Midlothian that it's actually improving as a result of some of the work that we put in.
just to join those two bits together. So what we're seeing is this data is perhaps not reflecting what we think the reality is. Is that what we're really saying here?
It's the closest, it's the only thing that we've got to measure at this point, other than the additional work that Jill's putting in around the citizens panel. But it gives us some indication that the improvement we think is happening, that anecdotally is reported by practices, is indeed. So it you know, it's small but credible and consistently organised data. So it's the best that we've got. What to say? Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any further questions? No. Okay, thank you. We will move on to 5.9, Midlothian Unscheduled Care Workstream Update, and I'm going to Morag for this one.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to do this presentation on behalf of Grace Cowan, who's actually on annual leave today. So we're going to take you through a reminder of the initiative itself, and then we'll update you on progress. And again, happy to take any questions. If I go to the next slide, please. So again, a reminder of this Scottish Government funded initiative. You'll remember that NHS Lothian were approached to develop a plan in November last year, and were the only board to be allocated funding to not only look at decompression of the system over winter, which is obviously our most challenging period, but to also look at some short-term and longer-term actions that would provide a more sustainable model of delivery and improvement in particular around unscheduled care. Next slide, please. And again, this is the next slide is just a reminder, again, around the areas of focus around the unscheduled care performance improvement. So again, it's looking to roll out the whole process of discharge without delay across all wards. You'll remember that the Scottish Government funding initially is just for the focus on improvement work in the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, but obviously any learning that Lothian get will look to be provided in the other two acute hospitals, the Western General and St John's as well. Discharge without delay, again, is really as soon as a patient is admitted, you already start the discharge planning around that and trying to focus any key interventions within that agreed multidisciplinary team decision making around what is a reasonable date for delay based on the presentation of that patient. The other thing, again, was around people experiencing acute mental health problems and being held at the Royal Infirmary rather than being admitted into the Royal Edinburgh Hospital, which is our specialist mental health hospital as well. Again, an assumption that having somebody sitting in the Royal Infirmary is a safe place with a severe and enduring mental health problem is not a safe assumption to make. And again, we needed to look at how these people are managed in a safer way. Again, a rapid assessment unit, which has some excellent performance data and some really good pathways and processes, was only provided at the Western General. So for people within Midlothian and East Lothian, we really didn't get much access to that and very limited access, primarily just because of geography. So again, looking at how that could be remodelled, redeveloped, provide more equitable access across Lothian. There has been, again, a focus on frailty, which ties in nicely with the work that I've already mentioned that Rebecca's leading on frailty. And Rebecca actually sits on the group to look at or to lead the work that primary care are doing that I'll talk to you a little about later around frailty management and better frailty management in particular. And then also looking again at what the current flow navigation service is to look at how we could work with specifically the Scottish Ambulance Service to, again, expand that flow navigation model and the control and ability to move people around the system into the safest bed possible. Next slide, please. And again, in terms of demand and capacity, you'll have seen this before really as well. We know this is about trying to shift the balance of care. We know that 90% of care is provided in the community and only 10% within acute services, and we need to move into that model and not just keep talking about it. We need to strengthen our capacity to provide the discharge without delay. So that's about community teams being able to pull people out sooner, and our acute care colleagues being able to plan with us around that most effective and efficient element of acute care for that individual patient, and to get them out and home as safely and quickly as possible. As I mentioned, again, Rebecca has led the way in terms of development of an enhanced model of care with our GP colleagues. And Rebecca, you'll update me. I think most practices have probably picked up this initiative, but an enhanced service to look at frailty anticipatory care planning. And also, again, as I mentioned before, to actually look at where is the safest place to support people with acute admissions of mental health related issues. Next slide, please. Again, just a reminder of the Midlothian plan. It is an iterative plan. It changes very slightly from week to week based on demand, based on workforce availability, and based on the learning that we've got as part of this process. But in terms of the initial phases we've got, we purchased additional care hours. I think that now probably is about 500 care hours we've actually commissioned, and we were able to see initially a really improvement in our performance around our delayed discharges in particular with that particular element of the plan. We're currently still in the process of recruitment for other elements of the plan. We have got some posts in place, and we are just about to bring other people into the teams as well. So I think, again, it's probably fair to say that elements, the later elements of the plan, we've not really had the teams in place yet to actually be able to evidence any improvement around our assumptions around this plan. We do have a service level agreement in place with our local Red Cross colleagues, and they are putting in a supported discharge model, again, very much looking at the softer indicators around how we could get somebody out of the hospital, things like transport, things like making sure that when they're home, that they're safe, that their heating is on, that they have got food in their fridge and so on as well. And that in itself will provide that kind of assurance model for people. But we know from evidence that we've done previously that by spending a little bit of time people when they come out of hospital, again, it reduces the readmission rate moving forwards too. Going forwards again, we will be looking to develop an in-reach service, which will be a Midlothian-based team that will be based within the Royal Infirmary itself, and then again, potentially expanding to other areas. Fiona's leading some work with colleagues across the other health and social care partnerships around palliative care, and particularly around our hospice contract, but also working with Marie Curie around looking at how we could provide palliative care and, more importantly, end of life care in a slightly different way. And the other thing, as we mentioned previously as well, is looking to enhance our hospital home capacity. I think recruitment-wise, we're just about in a position to actually have these new members of the team come into post. So again, at the next update, we'll be able to report some of the benefits around that. And the whole thing, as I've mentioned to you before, for me, pivots around having that single point of access model, or I'm now starting to call it that community front door model. And again, that's a key part of our wider transformation piece, not just the unscheduled care elements of it, where we will support people to present to a multi-agency team within Midlothian quicker. We will help them navigate the system, which we know is complex, and we will be able to access downstream elements of support at a much earlier stage in their journey, rather than waiting till their disease or their social situation is so advanced that actually statutory care is then required. Next slide, please. Again, please. So in terms of performance, again, early days, in terms of when the plan was agreed and supported by Scottish Government, the target at that time for us was 129 beds, and our performance at that stage was 118. And that was you'll look at that and go, that was a really, really good improvement there. That was when we put the additional care at home hours in, so we got that immediate benefit there. Moving through January and February and March, you'll see our target that was allocated to us moves from 143 down to what we are now looking to achieve, which is 115 beds. And you'll see that in January, we were 144 beds. February, we deteriorated slightly from the 19th to the end of February, relating to capacity within some of our teams around absence and around school holidays as well. But you'll see again the figure for March coming down to 125 beds, which again is only 10 away from our current trajectory. So you'll see again from these figures there is an initial improvement. I think it probably still demonstrates there is volatility around this. We've talked frequently around delayed discharges in particular, being sitting a very strong position one day, and overnight that position can change quite quickly for some of the things that we can't do anything about. So there's a degree of natural volatility still in there. There's a degree, I hope, of starting to see the benefits of the plan, but there's also some natural variation in this as well. So again, as we move through the months, we'll start to be able to hopefully understand which elements are impacting in which way. Just to note today, our current bed position is 128. We were down at 121 on Saturday, so we're hovering there and about. It's just 10 over trajectory. And as of today, out of these beds, we've only actually got 14 people delayed, and that's a mixture of health delays and social delays. So from a delays perspective, we're significantly better than we have been for a good few years. What we are now understanding is some of the bed capacity challenges that we've got as a system sit within that middle group of people who are not actually identified yet as a delay. So people who are in the hospital for something that our acute colleagues would manage, but they're not hitting any of our list yet. So now the teams are actually starting to focus on the delays, obviously, but also start to look at how many people in that group of round about 100 for us can we actually pull out there. And already we know that by continually reviewing these lists of people in their presentations, that we can identify anything between 10 and 20 people a day that potentially we could pull out. So that in itself, in terms of this project, has been a really good system learning point around where some of the bed pressures come. I think, again, previously the finger was very much pointed around the partnerships performance around delays, and it could have been better. We are improving that across the board, but certainly we're now understanding that some of that pool around these middle group of people actually is where we'll start to see some of the bed capacity releases and indeed the improvements. Next slide, please. Again, you've seen this slide before from the last presentation that I did. The top black line with a 0 is our targets. And you'll see again from the different colour lines of Edinburgh, East and Mid, just roughly where they are against that target. So again, all round really generally an improving position in terms of our bed usage. Next slide, please. And again, specifically around the delays, which I've really just updated you, it breaks down to health delays and social delays. Health delays are usually defined as when somebody is medically fit, but actually still requires some more rehabilitation. And generally for us, these people would be identified to go either to Midlothian Hospital or to Highbank, indeed, if they fit the criteria for our intermediate care facility. I do have a personal view around, I don't really get what health delays are, because I think if somebody's in hospital and they're in rehab, they should be getting rehab in hospital. So I'm not quite sure why we're calling them health delays, but that's how the system has chosen to record this. And on the graph on the right, again, it shows you again the position in the social delays. And again, as of today, we are sitting with 8 social delays and 8 health delays. So, you know, a significant improvement than what I would have certainly been reporting at this time last year. The only other piece of information that to update you on, and we will have an update for you at the next meeting, is that Scottish Government have announced another allocation of, I believe, about 100 million for improvement work across unscheduled care across Scotland, and boards were able to bid, put plans forward. So not just Lothian, all boards were able to bid for that money. We have put a bid in for Menchester Lothian. We're expecting to hear it any day if we get that. We're hopeful to get that, so that will bring hopefully an additional 700,000 to Midlothian if we are successful in that, which will again augment some of the work that's already happening there. So as soon as I have an update on that position, I'll certainly write out to the board and let them know, and then we'll build this into our kind of regular updates. And as the updates, I guess, move forward, it'll focus much more around the impact and the performance, which again is what we want to share with you, keep you updated on. So again, happy to take any questions.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Morag? Andrew?
So first of all, well done to the team, because this is not easy stuff to do. So really encouraged. I'm sort of interested to understand some of the constraints you're facing that stop it going forward. And you probably explained it, but just so that I just for me, is it care packages that are part of the constraint, or is it before that in identifying the people, or is it care home places? Where is some of the constraints or the rubbing points in the system?
Thank you, Andrew. So I guess there's the wider system challenges that we've got before we go into kind of our local challenges are around general capacity around this. You know, this is a really good piece of work, but it sucks up a lot of management time and clinical time as well. There's 3-4 meetings a week with senior colleagues around this. There's reporting that needs to be done, which means that without that additional capacity, other things are not getting done at the same time. And there's a constant balance around how we achieve that. There's workforce challenges because the 3 areas, Edinburgh, East and Mid, that are taking part in this just now are broadly going out for the same skill sets as well. So there's challenges for us in that. And as you can imagine, Edinburgh as a bigger employer, if you like, tends to attract more than perhaps East and Mid would as well. So there's a kind of workforce element too. But there's a general capacity just for us to pick this up with a level of scrutiny, appropriate scrutiny, by the way, but it's scrutiny on this as well. I guess in terms of the particular challenges locally, we do still struggle for care home bed capacity, but it's not as bad as it was. So I would say, and again, I would normally ask Grace to pick this one up. I would say that probably in relation particularly to our delays, it's probably half and half in terms of packages of care and care home. And as I said, the numbers are actually not that high for that just now. I think where the focus needs to be is working with our acute colleagues to support them to discharge people sooner. And there might be people that would come to us, or it might actually be people that would never see the health and social care partnership teams. But again, there's trajectories set in our acute colleagues about how many people they should be discharging a day, and like the other areas, they're not always achieving that. So what's stopping that, and how can we work together as a system to support that? And I think one of the things that I've definitely seen is it's been a real systems working together piece of work. I think before, when we've done any piece of work, it's been quite siloed, and Midlothian have done their thing, and East Lothian have done their thing, and acute have done their thing, and nobody's really coming together. Whereas now what we're starting to see is that, well, if we can see the problem is within our acute pathways, what can the partnerships do to work with acute colleagues to improve that, and vice versa? So I think, again, it's that whole system ownership, I think, that's probably changed. You mentioned earlier on around our ED performance. Our 4-hour target has significantly improved. You'll have heard at the board last week, again, we had a couple of weeks where we've had quite a few weeks we've been sitting really high in comparison to normal, not quite over the 80% yet, but sitting fairly high. And then we had a little bit of a deterioration. But again, we're starting to be able to drill down about what determines that variation. And sometimes it's as much as who's on shift on certain days and so on as well. So it's really allowing us to dig down and drill down into what's causing the problem, and actually then what do we do about it? But much more so doing it as a system.
Maura, can I add one more thing there? One of the things that's come out of this piece of work is a cultural issue that's going to take a little bit longer to work through. This, whilst the will is to move care closer to patients at home and deliver in the community, one of the common themes from a lot of these meetings is about the confidence of individuals and workforce to hold risk in different places. So the comfort zone for many of our professional colleagues is still to hold risk within hospitals and trying to push towards community. And from an HSCP perspective, we're better at that than our acute colleagues, and that's going to take some time to progress. But I guess as a constraint, that's a valid factor at the moment, but will improve.
No, that was one of the things I had picked up, the different professions having different thresholds of assessment of risk and bringing that together. But I'm also interested in perhaps looking at it the other way. Are we putting people out into homes without the support around them? And how do we ensure we don't do that as well? Because while all of us are encouraging and bringing people out of hospital because it's not the right place for them to be, I absolutely get that. we've got to make sure that those sorts of structures are in place, and we don't have people in, so for example, I've got a sheltered housing complex in Edinburgh, so it's not here, close to me, and the sort of anecdotal conversation from the people there is that some people are going in, they're very isolated, they're staying in their houses, and there's not any, and this is more social, befriending schemes and stuff like that. So I'm sure they've been supported in terms of their care, but it's those sorts of arrangements that they're becoming more isolated in that environment. So I'm just questioning that sort of risk and how we're understanding that. So sorry, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we've not seen that in Midlothian. We will not support a discharge that is not safe. Now, we unfortunately know at times things happen and people are readmitted, but that is not a driver. There's clearly a financial benefit around this, and there's an efficiency of bed usage around this. But the focus for us in Midlothian, as with other colleagues, is safety. So I guess to say that's not the case, and nothing has come to me to say there's any trend in that, Andrew, as well. I guess one of the things you're absolutely right, talking about social isolation and then the potential medical outcomes of social isolation as well. And again, that's why we've invested some of our money in working with the Red Cross to actually support people. And again, it's my words, that softer elements of their journey home, and to make sure they are supported. And the Red Cross themselves will also link them with various other community assets or groups, or put in other support, or indeed other referrals if need be, to make sure that people are not just sent out of hospital and left. So I'm totally board on that. Claire has done a lot of work in terms of our chief AHP role, working with acute colleagues around discharge risk indicator, I think it's called, Claire, and that's very much about us, and Claire will talk about it, about us developing a shared kind of risk assessment tool to support what Rebecca said around that joint understanding of risk and what we can and can't tolerate, but to do that kind of early planning. So I'll let Claire come in on that one.
Thanks, Morag. Yeah, I think the discharge risk indicator tool, it really speaks to what both Rebecca and Morag have already alluded to. So the importance of that collaborative system-wide approach that we need to take here. And part of the understanding our system piece that we'd done from an AHP perspective helped us to understand that we didn't speak the same language about a number of things, risk being one of them. And so to address that, the discharge risk indicator tool was developed, and that allows us to consider both the health and social care perspectives. It was co-created across the system, and it was a really innovative piece of work. The testing was really interesting, and we went to a rapid implementation, I think reflective of the pace of work, to be honest. So there's still gaps in the data in terms of the reporting of the discharge risk indicator, but what that is telling me every morning is how many patients we have across the system, and what their discharge risk indicator is. So where they are, who they are, and what that number is. And actually, the lower the number, the greater the question, like, why are they in an acute system? So from Midlothian's perspective, how do we utilise that information, and how do we do that in the most meaningful way? So given that we already have a really powerful digital tool with our Flow app, actually bringing those two pieces together. So we're focusing hard on how to enact that. All of this needs to happen really quickly, alongside process improvement and review work as well. So there's lots of opportunity there, but it certainly feels like a much more comfortable position when we have a shared language. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll go to Val.
Thanks. It's really very heartening conversation in many respects. And, I suppose from my perspective, just because I've had skin in the game before, I mean, some of the areas around the country have been doing this for quite some time. And I guess, when you started to speak, I thought the cultural issues will still be there, the sort of different behaviours around different wards, around the acute versus primary care. You spoke a lot about the risk, etc., etc. And one of the things that, I suppose after all the conversation, one of the only things I've really got to add, apart from observing how this has been doable, and my question is, why are we doing it now and we haven't done it before? But that's one just to reflect on. because I've been around this, and it's been a very challenging, hard going, and some people really cannot sustain their level of interest in delayed discharges as we know it, because it was always seen to be the end game and social care's problem. Whereas now we're talking about acute pathways, which is refreshing. But why haven't we done it before? It's just one to pin there. I suppose connected to that, if I wanted to do the leadership bit, is if we didn't do it and we knew we should have been doing it, and we were getting a talking to on a very regular basis, sometimes on a daily basis, and we never did it, and we're now doing it, is there anything in the system that might bring us back to lapsing? Are there any risks, whether it's leadership, whether it's direction, whether it's tenacity, whether it's perseverance? Are there any risks in the system that will bring us back there or slow us down? Because some areas have done this 10 years ago and we're doing it now, and I hope we are doing it. I hear that we're doing it, and I hear the things that we would always talk about in terms of risk, different risk thresholds. People are coming to the table now in a way that they've never done, is what you're telling me. But one of the things that I used to find interesting was that on a Friday, you could literally clear your delayed discharges, as we call them. I don't like that term because I don't think it describes a whole system. It describes one part of a system. So I think the whole thing is nonsense in terms of delayed discharges. But you would clear your delayed discharges on a Friday and you would come back on Monday and they'd be way up. And I guess one of the things that comes back to what Morag was saying about different people being on duty. And one of the things that was being surmised was that the senior staff were not on to keep the flow of discharges at the weekend. And it's that level of detail that you have to get in. So it's almost like changing the shifts, the people, the seniority, the decision making, the confidence in the system. So it's interrogating all of those things. So I guess I'm really heartened by the discussion. I'm nervous about it for the reasons that, this isn't new. And that's not taking away from the congratulations that we're doing it, because, it's just been such a, they call that wicked issue piece. It has been a wicked issue. So if we're getting to do it and getting in and around it, that's absolutely brilliant. And I commend everybody for their efforts in this. I just think I want to know why now, what's different, can we sustain it, is there any risk of lapsing? And it's not maybe a question for in here, but it's one to hold, or maybe to bring into the groups, because I think a huge amount of effort has gone into this. So sorry, Chair, that's a bit of a ramble, but, just really pleased, and thank you all very much, and well done.
Thank you, Val, and all your points are absolutely valid. I think there's a lot of elements of what you said are to blame for why it's not happened before. And I know you didn't use the word blame, but I am. I think leadership is key. I think the national position and therefore the senior position in Midlothian's view around delayed discharges has changed, for it being just an HSCP and usually a social care problem, to actually understanding, as we've been saying for a while, that actually it's a whole flow problem. It's right from the front door all the way through to getting people home. So I think that's really helpfully changed, and I think the leadership around that has been really welcomed, I guess. There are, Rebecca said it, there are still cultural ways of working across the whole system. It's not in any part of it that is starting to change as well. I think capacity, particularly in Midlothian, a small team. So there's definitely the injection of some additional resource to augment the teams that we know where we can get the flow from has certainly helped as well. But you're right, it takes a lot of time and a lot of focus to keep driving this performance as well. And we're starting to see that, but there's times where if we don't have senior people around, our performance drops a little bit. And Claire is working with Grace and Rebecca around that whole cultural piece with our teams as well, and a much more kind of performance KPI based, and so on as well. So, it's frustrating, but we have to accept that for people, our teams have been working in a different way for a while, that change just takes a little bit of time as well. Sometimes the pace that this is coming with and the scrutiny it's coming with is making that difficult, and we're having to manage that, if you like, at the same time, and change our processes and whatever. So I think there's lots of things that contributed to it, but I think certainly from a sort of central leadership perspective, that acknowledgement that this is not just an HSCP problem has probably been the key thing.
Thank you. And Amjad, please.
Thank you, Chair. And part of my comment, I think Rebecca touched on it a little bit, is about the movement of resources out into primary care. Every presentation and every report that comes out keeps saying the same thing, which is we need to be doing more in the community. So I suppose what conversations are taking place in how we're going to do this? When do we envisage these sort of things will happen? How will the resources go with this? And do we have the capacity, and how are we going to increase capacity? And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because I've been reading recently nationally in the UK, and also there's some evidence in Scotland as well that newly qualified GPs aren't able to get positions in general practice because some practices are cutting back on employing more GPs. So there's a lot of things in the mix. How are we going to move things into the community and primary care? What is going on in that space? Thank you.
So to sort of marry these two conversations together, my understanding is that this is the first time that the Scottish Government have supported the use of unscheduled flow money, and it's not all gone to acute and secondary care. So not just is there more money to the HSCPs to support this service, but it's the first time that general practice has been provided with some money to support hospital flow work. So that's quite groundbreaking in itself. Lothian was allocated 1.2 million, of which Midlothian's share is technically about 120,000 to support GPs through a new enhanced service for frailty assessment and recognition, proper quality future care planning and polypharmacy review, because we know that medicines related adverse events are one of the highest reasons that patients are admitted to hospital in crisis. So to do this work in recognition that actually one way to tackle delayed discharges in hospital and hospital flow is to avoid admission to start with. So this is a new focus with unscheduled care work that previously hasn't been tackled. So in terms of a cultural piece, a different way of working, to answer both of your questions in one go, that is perhaps one of the major differences with the work that we're doing this time round. And secondly, Amjad, to answer your concern about GPs not being able to get jobs currently, there is a situation nationally now amongst general practice relating to constriction of funding, not least due to national insurance contributions that independent contractors have got to pay, plus a number of other funding restrictions that have meant that GPs are using locums less often and maybe not filling recruitment vacancies at the same rate they were. So yes, we have a paradoxical situation where we have more trained GPs that now can't get work, having said for a long period of time we've not got enough GPs and we need to increase headcount. So until that situation and the funding is resolved and the Scottish Government put more money back into general practice, which is starting to come through, then that is a slightly strange and frustrating position that we have for colleagues.
Can I just come back in, Chair, if possible?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I suppose my point really was a general one, is that how we're going to move more chunks of money. I agree that there is a frailty bit going on and some money's coming in, but that doesn't actually move lock, stock and barrel, that shift of the curve from secondary care to primary care, which is what is needed. And in these sort of difficult times, I really don't see much of that happening apart from these small pockets of money, but that's just my comment. Thank you.
Amjad, I'm happy to come back on that as well. I guess without making Chris King sweat slightly, if we can show a sustained improvement in this, then that allows us confidence to go in and have discussion around, well, with your support as a board, around the allocation that we provide acute services as part of our set aside budget. So if we can show a sustained reduction in bed usage, then that allows us to review what our allocation will be to acute services and therefore allow us to redistribute that money within our local services too. Now, it's too early yet to do that because, as I said, we need to understand what's sustained improvement and what's normal variation and what's just normal volatility around that. But over the next year, with the initiatives that we put in place, we'll hopefully be in a position then to come back to the board if we are demonstrating that continued improvement to have a discussion around where we would want to go around set aside allocation. And Chris, if you want to come in on that, or are you happy with what I've said? Okay. So that would allow us, Amjad, to actually start to shift the balance of resource and then therefore shift the balance of care.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further hands. So in the interest of time, I will move on to 5.10, Midlothian overview of number 11 services. Nick later.
Thank you very much, Connor. So this was on the back of a request, I think going back as far as the tail end of last year in relation to, I think it's first started around drug-related deaths, and then we thought it would be helpful to provide an overview of the services we provide in what we call the number 11 recovery hub. Next slide, please. So just a very quick overview of what number 11 is. We call it number 11. It's formerly the Dalkeith Social Work Centre. It primarily housed previously justice services who are still there, and I'll come on to that, as well as children's services. It's a trauma-informed building, so without going into too much detail, we try and design the building, particularly the ground floor, which is the public access part, in a trauma-informed way, so as few screens as possible, separating admin from the public, and just generally a nice environment with the furniture and various other aspects. And there's a bit more to it than that, but that broadly is what we have in terms of the environment, and I will speak about the environment at the end. The key bit here is the bottom point, which is around the recovery hub being a no wrong door place for us. It's the only, and this is an important point, it's the only office we have or space we have within the HSCP that the public can access readily. We have nowhere else. And just to be clear, the people that access this space are probably the most vulnerable people that we work with. And I'll come back to the sort of numbers we're talking about in a short time, but it is somewhere where we're proud of, but also somewhere that people can access from essentially 8:30 in the morning through to 5 o'clock 5 days a week. And it's also open a little bit for staff on Saturdays and Sundays, and I'll come back to that. Next slide, please. So there are three core services I've said about justice social work. They're long-standing tenants there. We also have our adult community mental health services. Our older people's mental health services are managed by the same service manager, but they are located elsewhere in Bonnyrigg for the time being. And our substance use services are there as well. And all three of those service areas are supported by third sector who also have a presence in the building. As you will probably appreciate, those three services are very much interlinked, and that's one of the main benefits of having the services within number 11. It means that you don't have to make internal referrals. In most cases, you don't even have to use email or phone call. You can literally walk down the corridor and speak to a colleague from another service and try and get people the help that they are looking for on that particular day. It tries to be as responsive as it possibly can be. Next slide, please. There's a lot in this. I'm not going to go through this in a huge amount of detail for the interests of time. It's also quite detailed in terms of justice social work. I'm very happy for the presentation to be circulated. But essentially, justice social work does two main things. The first part of their job is to prepare assessments and recommendations to statutory agencies. That's primarily the courts, but also includes the prison service as well as the parole board. And secondary to that, they work with and manage people within the community, and that can be people coming out of prison. It can be people that are on community-based orders, which is a large part of what they do. So an old money community service now called unpaid work. And they also have quite a, and this is often a little bit hidden, or people that aren't working within it aren't quite as appreciative of this. There's a huge amount of work that Justice does, which is around the preventative element, particularly in relation to violence against women and domestic violence, but also in relation to alcohol work as well. And again, that's where the substance use service comes in. So two main areas, assessment work and then working with people when they come out. There's an awful lot of publicity around what we call MAPA, which is the sexual and violent offenders. It's a relatively small population, I have to say, that is very, very well managed and managed through a structured way. We currently have approximately 62 people in Midlothian managed through MAPA. There are 3 levels, with level 1 being the lowest level. 59 of those 62 people are on level 1. Level 3 is the high tariff ones. We have nobody currently in Midlothian on level 3. Next slide, please. Again, I'll not spend too much time on this, and it's not set out probably as well as I should have set it out. But essentially, outcomes in justice are driven by national drivers, which are set out there. There's a big drive around community justice, which is a catch-all term, but is very much around involving all aspects of the community in justice and preventative work. And then there's a vision for Scotland as well from Scottish Government, which is around creating a safe and resilient set of services. Numbers are quite tricky within justice because it doesn't necessarily reflect the numbers of people we work with, and also outcomes are quite hard to bring through because we're very much guided by what comes through from the courts usually. But again, the numbers that we work with on unpaid work are set out in the top, the number of CPOs that would be. We don't have the data for the current or the just ended financial year, but the numbers are variable. We had a higher number, 228 people on CPOs in 23-24. So that's essentially unpaid work mostly. And then some of the other numbers are smaller around supervised bail, SDS, which I appreciate we're getting into detail around. And I've already said a little bit about MAPA. And then moving on next to the next slide, which is mental health. And again, this just sets out the size and scope of the service area. I'll not run through every single team. I'll pick out a couple that are important to us. The second from bottom, the Midlothian IHTT, mental health loves acronyms. The IHTT is Intensive Home Treatment Team. That's our virtual hospital ward. If we didn't have that, we would probably need between 6 and 10 more beds within the Royal Edinburgh. So that's the team that works. It works every day from 8 o'clock through to midnight, 7 days a week. And then the out of hours is passed over to the Royal Ed. But it works with at any one time between 6 and 12 people. And those are acutely unwell people that would require, in olden days, would have required a hospital bed, but now we manage within the community. Some of them end up going into hospital, but the majority of people that we work with in the IHTT, we keep out of hospital for longer, and in many cases don't require hospital care. So there are good outcomes around that service. And the other 2 services I just want to pick out, largely because I have a clear professional interest, is our mental health social work team and what we call our MHO service, which is mental health officer. And again, I appreciate a number of people here will know about mental health officers, but they're a crucial part of the system. They're social workers with additional training who can detain people in hospital. They do a lot more than that around adults with incapacity, but they're a crucial element to what we provide. Right down at the bottom, the mental health and resilience service is a third sector collaboration we have, and that's for lower level mental health issues that people can phone up and get help around distress and get signposted. It's a pressured service in terms of numbers, and it's also pressured financially as well, but we are looking at ways we can assist and get that over the hump. Next slide, please. This just highlights another few services we have. We have a psychology service, which has quite long waits, although they are improving. That's not unique to Midlothian. And our Midlothian access point is run by Health and Mind, another third sector provider. And again, that links a little bit into the MARS service I just talked about, and it looks at lower level psychological interventions. The purpose of some of these services is to create resilience within the community and move people away from either primary care services or the secondary care services that we run in number 11. And long term, we're hoping that will prove beneficial and that people will wait less time, but the people that are waiting for the shorter time are the people that need the most help. And I'll not go through all the legislative context again, we'll send that out, but that's the legislative and policy context, and apologies for the way that's been set out. It could have been done better, but we're trying to squeeze things in to to this. Again, just outcomes. Morag talked earlier a little bit about mental health and the interface with acute. We have in total 15 beds at the Royal Edinburgh Hospital commissioned. I'll focus on the acute bed numbers, which is 8. We also have some rehab beds. We generally underuse those beds, not always, but generally from week to week, we generally use between 6 and 7. Our performance is Lothian leading, I have to say, is very, very good. And again, I come back to the IHTT that I talked about earlier, the intensive home treatment team. That does a remarkable job in keeping people out. We also have some very good outcomes around our adults with incapacity reports. And again, that links a little bit to what Morag was talking about earlier around delays. We allocate our reports. I know it says 12 weeks there, but actually our 6-week standard is around about 65%, which is again, could be better, but is pretty good in the national context. And our A12, which is the heat target around psychological therapies, is improving and is one of the better ones now within the country, although it contributes to a Lothian figure, which is still challenging. We also do lots of work, and we'll come on to this in substance use, but we do it in justice as well. And I should have said, and it links a little bit to the APR that Jill was talking about earlier. We do a lot of work around patient experience or client experience. And these are quite difficult areas sometimes to get feedback, positive or challenging, but we work quite hard to do it. And there's a lot of work going on at number 11 with boards and various other visual things that we now do for people who come into number 11 to see other people's experience. Next slide, please. And the final component we have is around substance use services. And again, the bulk of that is nursing and social work, but we also have a small third sector presence as well. We work very closely with our colleagues in East Lothian, just due to our size, but also the Alcohol and Drug Partnership that I chair is in East and Mid Lothian, as is Public Protection, again, just due to our size. There's a lot of work being done around this area, as people appreciate, and I'll just say a little bit about the outcomes in the next slide. So people will maybe have heard of the medication assisted treatment standards, or MAT standards. There are 10 of those. 5 have been reported on already, and we are green for those, which means we are meeting those. The MAT standards 6 to 10, we are just in the process of finalising those, but we have a provisional green as well from Scottish Government in relation to those. So those are essentially around assisting with the drug death crisis that we've had across Scotland. So it's a range of different things, but essentially it's about how quickly people can access the right treatment in the right place. And I'm generalising it, but that's broadly it. There's an increasing focus on alcohol-related deaths. Our figures tend to hover between 15 and 20. That's an underrepresentation of alcohol-related deaths. It's how they are counted and what constitutes an alcohol-related death, which is quite a complex algorithm to do with liver function and various other things. I'm not for a minute suggesting that 15 people last year, well, 2023 are the latest figures, that's the sole number of deaths due to alcohol within Midlothian. It will be higher than that, but that's how it is counted. In terms of drug-related deaths, we had 20 in 2023. The figures there are slightly wrong. It was only 4 in 2022. That, however, was an outlier. The 3 or 5 year average is a far better mechanism to count, and that average is at about 16 to 18. And that's broadly the figure that we've plateaued at over the last number of years. We are looking at the figures coming out in August being quite challenging for 2024. We anticipate that it will probably not be lower than 20 at the moment, but we don't know yet. We had some challenging months in 2024, particularly in the summer, due to some of the substances that were coming into the Midlothian. And the main measurement that the government have with us, other than the MAT standards, is what's called the 11 heat performance target, which is around people accessing treatment within 3 weeks of referral. We are one of the best in the country in relation to that. It's counted for East and Mid, but Midlothian is extremely good. There isn't a huge discrepancy between East and Mid. We have consistently been, so the standard is 90%. We've consistently been at that for the last 2.5 years. It was as low as the mid-60s when I came to Midlothian, and it's now hovering effectively between 95 and 100% all the time. And next slide, please. Just in terms of the future, the building has its limitations. We have 150 odd staff aligned against 85 desks, and it's a space where we need people in because it's an open access building. I could do with a second number 11 somewhere else in Midlothian. We're experiencing some challenges around the change in drug trends, particularly synthetic opioids. It's really hard keeping up to date with the trends. They are hugely toxic and dangerous. We have an increasing challenge, as does every other area, around neurodiversity, particularly transfers from CAMS. But adult ADHD assessments are challenging. And within mental health, we really do have a lack of appropriate complex need housing, so rehab housing. We don't have enough of it, which leads to delays within the Royal Edinburgh in rehab. We do have some opportunities that we've set out there. One of the biggest things we do is the second bullet down in that section, which is around the allocation meeting that we have, which is across the different services. So people get allocated in, and the services will all pick up the people straight away. It's really pretty positive about how we do that. And we do have a very assertive outreach model, as I've probably highlighted, but not just in mental health, but the other aspects as well. And we were talking a little bit about numbers in the last the last presentation, and I suppose just to highlight that we have around about 250 people that we work with within justice. We have around 350 within substance use, and we have anywhere between 400 and 500 people within mental health at any one time. So we have around about 1,000 people that these services and number 11 works with. Funding is a challenge, and funding isn't necessarily coming to us in the way it is coming to other parts of the system that we've just talked about, and that is a frustration for me that I do, as Morag knows, articulate. But it is worth pointing out again and reinforcing that we are working with stand-still budgets a lot of the time, particularly within mental health and substance use, and it is a challenge for us as we see increasing complexity. And I've probably gone over time, Chair, but I appreciate it's a very complex set of areas. We could probably spend as much time on each of the services getting into it, but I hope I've given as clear an overview as I can at the moment.
Thank you, Nick. Does anyone have any questions for Nick on his presentation? It's very comprehensive. Val?
No question. Just to say thank you. I mean, it seems a shame to go to all that trouble and not to say thank you. And it is very comprehensive. It's complex and complicated area. And it seems like, you know, there's a dynamism around it in as much as you seem to be progressing, getting feedback, working on that, working with the national sort of standards, but, you know, sort of performing well on many levels, if not every level. So I commend you at that. And again, I think it's maybe not for here, but, you know, it gets such good press. Number 11, it performs so well. You know, Connor, is there not another little house somewhere? I don't know that you should make it bigger. You know, my intuition is there should be another one because of the ease of access, and maybe with a slightly different, but you know, lovely development opportunity there if there was ever an opportunity. I'll leave that as my last comment. He didn't pay me anything.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Number 11 is a prime example of being one of the services that is a complete jewel for the HSCP. And I do think it needs to expand, and likely into the south of Midlothian would be ideal. Kind of covers both bases. So it's something that I would be keen to look at. And I think, as Nick said, he'd be keen to look at as well. Is there any further questions for Nick? No? Okay, thank you very much, Nick. I can take an action on that. I mean, I'll find an empty house in Pennycook if you want. Okay, I'll move on to 511, Midlothian IGB Integrated Assurance Report, and I'll go to Fiona Stratton for that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is your regular update. We update you twice a year on integrated assurance. It's a paper that's authored by the four professional leads, and Nick has a dual hat there, and the executive business manager. I've noticed that Appendix 2 and 3 haven't been included in your pack, and those are some of the pictures around about how assurance is delivered around about the governance and assurance framework and the risk management process. So hopefully we'll be able to get that out to members of the board. So the board are asked to note the contents of the report, provide feedback on whether sufficient assurance is provided across those delegated functions. And we're really interested to know what members of the board would be looking for in addition to the contents of this paper. This is more of an update and a revision. You get a much chunkier report in the autumn, which includes our annual report to the Healthcare Governance Committee. So that's a bit of a beast. But this one hopefully was readable. Already had a conversation with Val about the diagram that shows the structures. She's got my copy there, and we're going to work on making that a bit more readable, but certainly interested to have a conversation and include my colleagues in the responses.
Thank you, Fiona. Any questions for Fiona on her report? Andrew?
Oh, just one that I'm always very interested in is the serious adverse events where recommendations are brought forward. How do we keep on top of those to make sure they are actually implemented?
There's quite a robust system in place, Andrew, where there are actions outstanding in relation to a serious adverse event. Those are logged on the DATIC system, and the quality improvement support team, which are part of the wider NHS Lothian quality function, they ensure that those are completed, and we have oversight of those in the MSAG, the Midlothian Safety and Experience Action Group, which sits directly below the Clinical and Care Governance Group and the SMT.
Thank you. I don't see it. Morag?
Yeah, just again, Fiona's alluded to this, and we will get the pictures round. You've seen them before, but the governance assurance framework is a really kind of groundbreaking piece of work the Midlothian team have developed. So some of the work that EHPs within Lothian have done, we've rolled it out across all of our services in an integrated way, which gives us as managers and the service managers, if you like, that overarching picture of where are we with assurance in a very simplistic way, but there's layers of information that sit below that as well. So again, the team, the whole management team have been involved in developing it, but Claire's our lead for it just now, and it gives us that quarterly overview. And again, if you look at our performance, if you like, from the beginning of the year, where there's quite a lot of, it's a red, amber, green thing, quite a lot of ambers in there, and now looking at it, it's pretty much mostly green as well. Now there's still work to do on that. There's still a little bit of challenge in some of the submissions around that, but again, a really quick and easy tool to capture where we are with assurance and allow us to then convey that over to you. And I know that we're using a similar approach around some of the out-nav work that we're using for performance framework for the IGB as well. But Claire, I don't know if you want to add anything on the governance assurance framework.
Thanks, Morag. Yeah, I think what we've noted, we're just about to report on Q4 for this year. So it'll be interesting to do the comparison back to 23-4 for the same period, because when we looked at Q3, not only were we describing approximately half of our system with low levels of assurance, that was also based on the fact we only really had engagement from about 60% of the system. So we're now consistently reporting between 85 and 100% of the system, which is great. And we're seeing those overall levels of assurance increase. And it's not that we are looking for a sea of green, as Morag describes, as that kind of traffic light system that the dashboard uses. It's fundamental that this is the means for us to have that collective oversight of our overall level of assurance, but also that we use the other component parts within the system, like clinical and care governance, another arena, that we share the learning that is generated through what are often collective issues, right? Because if it's being felt in one part of the system, you can generally sense it elsewhere. So trying to find a way to do that. So we're working with the digital innovations team at the moment as we test out a new platform that we input our reporting into, that then integrates with the Tableau dashboard system. So my hope is that we can try and integrate that information a little bit more, because at the moment there is a slight limitation on that dashboard, and you'll have seen it in previous slides. So if we can automate that process a little more and have that information also visible alongside that overall level of assurance, it would certainly make me happier. But I think where we can collectively bring that information together, it's worthwhile. So that's the aspiration. Whether I can achieve it or not is another matter, but you know, we'll strive for it.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands, so I will move on. The remainder reports 512 and 513 are both for noting only. So if board members are happy to note, just in the interest of time. What 512 was the category 1 responder update from Storm Eowyn. I never know how to say that right. And 513, the Accounts Commission Integrating Joint Boards Finance Bulletin. So as long as more board members are happy to note, I will move on. Yes. Okay. Okay, so I will note that there is a development session of the IGB on Thursday, the 8th of May, between 2 and 4 o'clock for IGB members only. And the next meeting of Midlothian Integration Joint Board will be held on Thursday, the 12th of June, 2 till 4. And I believe it's actually also my last meeting as chair. So that's a good thing for me, probably. Okay, thank you, everyone, and I'll see you at the development session. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.